What's your problem? What is your solution? This is an interview series about changing the world. There are many things that are critical to our life and to our society that we don't seem to value enough. We need oxygen to breathe. The engines of our cars need oxygen too. But who owns the air or the trees or the creeks? Peter Barnes is an entrepreneur who wants to change capitalism to make it better serve people and planet. Peter Barnes is a businessman who is fixing the flaws of capitalism. Welcome to Kamp Solutions. You're a businessman. You started several companies that became successful. You know that capitalism works. You've seen it work. And yet you want to change capitalism. Why?
Well, capitalism works in a lot of ways, but does it work the way we need it to work at what I would call a meta level? Does it produce the social and ecological outcomes that we want, that we need in this day and age? Or does it only work in the sense of producing more and more goods and more profits and more what appears to be wealth, but may not actually be wealth?
So the problems of society you relate to the way capitalism works. If we talk about environmental problems, degradation, global warming, how does that relate to the malfunctioning of capitalism?
Capitalism, at least as I see it, but many other people also agree, that it has three tragic flaws. The one that we'll probably focus on today is there is nothing in it that limits its destruction of nature. Left to its own devices, which it is pretty much where it's now, it's going to destroy nature as we know it. Flaw number two is ever-increasing inequality, ever-increasing concentration of wealth and power at the top. That is just built into the DNA of capitalism. And the third, relatively minor compared to these other two, but it concerns a lot of people, is this inevitable tendency to have speculative bubbles that then crash. So there's an inherent financial and speculative instability that's built into the system. It would be nice to be able to fix that.
You've compared in your writings the workings of capitalism with the game of Monopoly. What did you learn from that board game of Monopoly?
Well, first of all, Monopoly, the board game, is a perfect exemplar of the second tragic flaw that I was talking about, the tendency of capitalism to concentrate wealth at the top. So Monopoly, as you say, we have one winner, everybody else bankrupt. But there are other interesting aspects of Monopoly that caught my attention as well that aren't so negative. One of them is the fact that everybody starts off with the same amount of capital. This is not the way real-world capitalism works, which is another major flaw, if you want to add to the list of flaws, is that the starting conditions are grossly unequal. So you can't expect really good outcomes when the starting conditions of the game are, a few people have half the wealth, as is the case today, and everybody else has very little. That's not going to be a good game. The other interesting thing about Monopoly is that everybody gets $200 when they pass go, whether they're rich or poor or whatever. It's kind of like a basic income, and you get it because you're a player in the game. There's something about infusing a market system with money, a little bit, not too much, not too little, not too much, but there's a certain amount of money. If you infuse it into a market equally to all players in the market, it actually does a lot of good for the market itself as well as for the players who get the money. Every month, I would make it a monthly thing. That's like passing go. You pass the end of the month, boom, you get another infusion. Would it be $200? Would it be $400? Would it be more? These are details to be worked out, and the other detail to be worked out is where does that money come from? But in terms of implementation, it could be a phone app. You sign in, if you have a social security number and an address, boom, 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 you're in. And you put in your bank account, and every month, boom. So that part is...
It's not hard.
Yeah.
But let's figure out, how do we fund it?
Where's that money coming from? Okay. Well, the first thing, and as I say, in my mind, most important thing, that having a kind of base income of a few $100s a month, guaranteed for the rest of your life, no questions asked, is you could relax just a little more. It would calm everybody down, give people a chance to maybe once in a while take a day off so they could collect themselves or take care of a family member or see a friend. I mean, just to slow down and relax a little bit would be a tremendous contribution to human well-being, let aside all sorts of other benefits which we could get to, including saving the planet.
But where do we get the money from? This is a lot of money.
All right. The simplest, most effective way to do this physical limiting of carbon is through a cap and permit and auction system. During World War II, there were these rationing coupons that every household had. You know, you could only get 2 gallons of gas a month or whatever it was, and you had to produce the coupons, and that was it. This is how we dealt with the fact that there was only a limited amount of gas that we were going to allow Americans to burn because we were in a national emergency. The way the rationing would work is, okay, upstream somebody says, this year we're going to allow X million pounds of carbon, okay? And the way we're going to allot those X million pounds is we're going to issue X million permits.
Yes.
And we're going to auction them, just like you were buying a treasury bill or an oil lease or something.
Yeah.
We'll sell these permits to the highest bidder. And in fact, as we get fewer and fewer permits, people are going to bid more for the number of permits that are actually available, so the amount of revenue will actually go up for a while as the number of permits issued goes down. A regular permit auction for fossil fuels while we're still burning them would raise enough to pay dividends. This is the point that I want to make because it's where we're getting at. And it traces back to a deeper issue, which has to do with the commons. The atmosphere, well, you know, it's a physical thing. It's the air we breathe. We know that. We know we can't pollute it. But in an economic sense, it's kind of a mysterious thing. Nobody owns it. We know that there is people that owns land and people actually own water rights. We know that. But nobody really owns any air. I mean, polluters use it for free, but in fact, the reason they can use it for free and without limit is because nobody owns it. No individual should be allowed to own it. No corporation should be allowed to own it. It is a gift to all of us from creation. It belongs to all of us equally. If a polluter wants to buy a permit to pollute, he is buying it from us. And
Us, all of us.
All of us, right. You know, in practical terms, you'd probably do it country by country. If that were the way we arranged our economy, at least in this particular respect, you would have the phenomenon where the faster we reduced climate change, the more our incomes would rise, at least for the next 20 years or so until we got to a fairly low level of carbon use.
And it's interesting because there we're solving the problem of global warming by also solving the problem of inequality in society. We're giving people a basic income. I think a good example today is if we talk about Amazon.com.
Yes.
Amazon could not have worked without electricity, without roads, without the internet, obviously. A lot of that came through tax money that was paid by our ancestors.
Yes.
So in a way, we have an argument to say, hey, listen, Mr. Jeff Bezos, you're using my road. Can you please pay me?
Exactly. There's a whole lot of stuff that Jeff Bezos had nothing whatsoever to do with that contributes to the billions that he's worth today. And this is true, really, for every business person, myself included. We all benefit, get a tremendous head start because of stuff that we use but don't pay for. That's the point. So, this being the case, one can make a very good argument that the people who are making billions today ought to pay something for use of all the co-inherited wealth that they have taken advantage of, but they haven't paid a dime for. And if we put prices on that co-inherited wealth, and because we each co-inherit it equally, pay ourselves equal shares of what the billionaires are paying to make their tremendous fortunes off of that co-inherited wealth, we'll have a lot of money and we'll all be better off.
You're, in a way, you're a bit of a strange man. I mean, you're you're a businessman.
Yes.
You talk about capitalism, but many people could argue, well, you're a socialist. But probably when I say that, you will
Right.
say, no, I'm not a socialist.
Right.
But where does this drive come from? What is that?
I would say I'm a practical man.
Yeah.
In other words, I can see where markets work pretty well. I've been in them, and but I can also see where they have egregious flaws that need to be fixed, and then I can figure out, well, how might we fix them? We need something to counterbalance these profit-maximizing automatons.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, well, we could create some other fictional entities, because after all, corporations are fictional entities. They don't exist in nature.
No?
We thought them up and put them here on this planet and let them run loose, and we see the consequences of that today. We could create some other fictional entities
Yes.
that are the counterbalances to corporations. And these other fictional entities would represent pieces of the commons. And when corporations say, oh, we're going to dump our crap in this particular piece of the commons, you've got somebody there, a new entity that didn't previously exist, that says, oh, wait a minute, no, you can't. We're only allowing X much, and you have to pay for it. The internal algorithms of these new life forms would be, for example, preserve the asset.
Yeah.
That's the number one thing. Second algorithm would be to share the income equally. So you have those two algorithms built in to these new entities that now have management responsibility for pieces of the commons. And the more of those things you have, the more you're going to be able to constrain corporations, protect the commons, protect nature, and lift everybody's income.
Many of the things you talk about can be achieved through taxation.
Right.
But there is a big difference in your thinking between
Right.
taxation and universal basic income
Right.
funding. So explain the difference.
Okay. Tax laws, at least in this country, are extremely fickle and highly politicized. So to build an economy on the assumption that the government will always be doing the right tax policy is not going to work. So I'm saying to myself, well, what's an alternative that would be, in a way, stabler than taxes? And that's where this notion of creating sort of common property that has similar features to private property, except its purpose is to preserve the property and share its income, not just to maximize profits for a few. But it's property. And the thing about property is that property doesn't go away when the government changes. Property endures essentially forever.
Yeah.
And it's the government's job, in fact, to protect it. So if we could get out of this ball game of taxing and spending and into a different ball game of property that is common property that pays income to everybody, protects the commons, increases people's incomes and sense of security and belonging in society, and then you have government taxing and doing its thing, that's all fine. But the thing is that once the common property regime is established, it will endure.
How would that ultimately impact environmental policies? How would it impact global warming or even the reverse of global warming,
Right.
which we try to achieve?
It would create institutions like sky trusts or ecosystem trusts that would be the trustees of these various ecosystems, if you will. They're pieces of the commons that have no guardians, no trustees at the moment. That, if we could set it up like that, starting in, say, one major country like the United States and replicate it to some extent, and Canada has started moving in this direction, we could drive all these other steps, the technologies and so forth and so on, because they would have no choice. They would have to come up with ways to reduce energy or fossil fuel use rather,
Yeah.
and they would. I have no doubt that they would.
That system works.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What is your problem?
My problem, well, it's not just my problem. The problem is capitalism. And we're not going to fix global warming and a lot of other things until we fix capitalism. That's the problem.
And what's the solution?
Well, I don't have a one-word answer to that. I can't say it's socialism. I can't say it's anything else with an ism at the end. But what I've been trying to elucidate is a system that kind of looks like capitalism but feels a little like socialism maybe. Collective ownership of the commons within the context of a market system is essentially what I see as the answer.
So we've been talking about changing structures, changing the rules of the game, changing the monopoly game. What do you say about the players? I mean, we seem to be, always drifting towards greed. Well, I mean, not always, but there are some inherent problems in who we are.
I don't buy that argument. I mean, I do buy that greed is an inherent part of humans, but to allow greed to destroy the planet is not something that is inherent in us, I don't think. I think we have other things that could be, were they encouraged, cooperation, preservation, various other forms of behavior that we're equally capable of doing. If we had a system that was designed to encourage those things, so greed didn't run rampant, then I think we could make it.
Better rules?
System design, right.
Yeah, system design.
System design.
Different rules of the game lead to a different outcome, and the players will play by those rules.
Exactly. Different rules of the game, different property rights, regimes, and the way the players are designed. I say the corporation is designed to do one thing, and we need other players that are designed to do other things, and that have kind of co-equal power or balance, and then we'll be okay if the Earth isn't wiped out before we get there.
So some people say when you give people, as you advocate, a free basic income, the next thing they do is they go and buy drugs. I mean, I make it a very black and white argument, but so giving money for free to people seems very counterintuitive to a lot of people.
It does, but that's not what happens. I mean, Alaskans didn't run out and buy drugs with their dividends. There's no evidence whatsoever that this is what happens. There have been countless other experiments. They use it for things, do they buy a bottle of beer every once in a while with it? Sure. But, what they're doing is relaxing, and that's okay.
Some people argue, well, we have sustainability programs, businesses are very much aware of their environmental responsibilities nowadays, so why do we need to change the rules?
Well, first of all, corporations are not really designed to be socially responsible. They can pretend, they can greenwash, they can do a little less harm than they're doing, but all of this stuff is on the margins. The main thing corporations do is grow and make profit, maximize profit, and externalize costs. That's their business model.
I know, but you didn't do that.
We did,
No.
but not to the extreme.
Well, but you were managing that.
What I'm saying is I would not rely on the disinterested judgment of CEOs, however sustainable they may paint themselves, because the nature of the beast is the way it is, and there's only a small margin of wiggle room in there. It has a lot to do with the nature of publicly traded stock corporations. They are dominated by the algorithm of Wall Street, which is to maximize the short-term return to shareholders. They cannot escape that. So something needs to do that job. Some deus ex machina has to appear to do the job that the system itself, as it is currently constructed, is not doing, will not do, cannot do in its current configuration. So what could that something be, and how could we stick it into the system before the system destroys the whole planet? That's basically where we're at. And I'm not sure what I'm proposing could fix things fast enough. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think we're up against the wall right now and we don't have a lot of breathing room.
What you speak about in the interested parties, I mean, they are the far majority. I mean, in terms of the people involved, it's small percentages of humanity. So the vast majority of the people would benefit from what you propose.
But the vast majority do not rule under our current way of doing things. Even in so-called democratic countries, the vast majority doesn't seem to rule. So this is the problem.
So if Peter Barnes would be president of the United States for just a day, and he could implement one or two things just by executive order, because that's what they do these days.
Yeah,
executive
right.
decree.
It's a national emergency, right.
You would be your national emergency. What would you do?
Well, the first thing I would put in place is an upstream limit on fossil fuels entering the economy. And this auction system that we talked about with the dividends paid out to everybody. That could be done in a day.
Yes.
I would then talk to the administrator of Social Security and say to that person, I want you to come up with a plan for expanding Social Security so it goes and covers people who are younger than 65, all the way down to birth, so that everybody gets a certain amount of money every month. Not necessarily as much as seniors do, because they need more, because they're not able to work. So this whole notion that everybody is going to have to work in order to support themselves, and if they don't, it's their fault, and screw them, that whole way of thinking is just obsolete. We really have to understand that, yes, people should work. I'm all for work, and work should be rewarded, and entrepreneurship should be rewarded. But at the same time, everybody needs a base. In a market society where money is everything, you cannot survive without money. Money should be spread around so that everybody gets some just for being alive. And it's a right. It's not just a handout, especially if we see this money as emerging from wealth that we all co-inherit. It should be shared.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Here in Point Reyes, where Sir Francis Drake landed in 1579, nature hasn't changed much in centuries. That's the value of the commons. That's what we need to reverse global warming and create a more just society. That's the mission of Peter Barnes. Stay tuned for more climate solutions.